lawmakers make their positions known on President Buhari's request for a loan? It's clear and firm. The answer is no. And both chambers agree that elections must hold in some federal constituencies that don't have representatives till date. Hello, I am Lanre Lasese. Welcome to our review of a week some have called unprecedented and others say is just typical. Now, in what some will describe as cheering news, some parts of the Petroleum Industry Bill have passed second reading in the Senate. Here is that report.
At the resumption of the 8th Assembly, federal lawmakers in the Senate identified the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill as a key part of the legislative agenda of the upper chamber. More than a year into the 8th Senate, the Petroleum Industry Bill is coming up for second reading in the upper chamber. This is coming a few days after the Minister of State for Petroleum, Dr. Ibe Kachukwu, said the executive is in the process of completing a draft petroleum reform bill which will be passed to the National Assembly in a matter of weeks. In the meantime, the Senate is going ahead with the process of working on legislation to reform the petroleum sector. The sponsor of the Petroleum Industry Bill before the Senate says the bill seeks to create efficient institutions with clear and separate roles for the petroleum industry. The bill also proposes the unbundling of the NNPC into two commercial entities.
That is, the National Petroleum Company and the National Assets Management Company. And E, ensuring strong governance, transparency and accountability in all institutions.
There was a brief debate on the bill.
All the petroleum producing countries that we know, almost all of them, have robust, efficient and effective legislations guiding the operations within the individual countries' petroleum industry. And this has been playing to their advantage. Each country, it has been playing to its advantage, but Nigeria has become an exception.
It is very timely indeed that we bring in a model of running the organizations within the petroleum industry that meets international standards rather than this confused picture of joint venture business as defined by the JV agreements.
The bill passed second reading and was referred to the Senate Committee on Petroleum Upstream and Downstream for further legislative work. The committees are to work on this first part of the bill passed and report back to the Senate in 4 weeks.
Now, in what most say has become a very interesting development in the National Assembly, the two chambers have again taken a common position on an issue: the need for elections in some state and federal constituencies.
The House of Representatives has urged the Independent National Electoral Commission to immediately conduct all outstanding elections in Rivers State. In a motion brought under matters of urgent national importance by Minority Leader Leo Ogo and supported by 5 other lawmakers, the House noted that people in the affected federal constituencies have been denied their constitutionally guaranteed right to representation in the national and state assemblies.
Also aware that in the case of Rivers State, the Court of Appeal in December 2015 ordered the rerun election be conducted within 60 days, but INEC has since consistently failed, neglect or refused to do so, apart from the one it conducted on May 19, 2016 in only 4 out of the 12 federal constituencies, and rerun elections were ordered in December 2015.
The House has mandated its Committee on Legislative Compliance and Electoral Matters to ensure compliance with the House resolution and returns to the House in 2 weeks with a confirmed date for the elections. The Senate considered the same issue as some of the senators say INEC is denying people from Rivers State representation in the Senate.
We also observe that the failure of INEC to conduct the rerun elections in Rivers State within the time frame ordered by the respective election petition tribunals and the courts is in breach of the Electoral Act
and Section 76 of the 1999 Constitution, thus endangering the nation's democracy.
You can imagine today we are about to discuss PIB without any member from Rivers State.
A single resolution was put forward and passed.
Those in favor of the prayer call on the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) to conduct all outstanding elections in Rivers State not later than 10th of December, on failing which the Senate will suspend plenary to such a time the said elections are held. Those in favor of this prayer say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
These lawmakers also continued with the process of amending the act setting up the electoral body, INEC. According to the Chairman Senate Committee on INEC, 6 amendments are being sought, one of which is the controversial issue of the replacement of a candidate at an election who dies between commencement of polls and declaration of the result of the election. This situation created an impasse in the Kogi governorship election. However, lawmakers were sharply divided over this amendment. The Senate President, however, asked the committee to go back and do more work on this particular amendment because of its controversial and delicate nature.
Now to the President's loan request. This is a matter lawmakers are not taking lightly, one that has encouraged suggestions of a face-off between the legislature and the executive. The Senate has taken a position. Members of the House of Representatives also gave an indication of their thoughts on the loan, and the Senate has accused the executive of submitting an incomplete medium-term expenditure framework document. Let's look at these reports. Exactly a week ago, senators received a letter from President Muhammadu Buhari requesting approval to borrow the sum of $29.9 billion to execute key infrastructural projects across the country between 2016 and 2018. In the letter, President Buhari had explained that the external borrowing plan would be targeted at projects which cut across all sectors, with special emphasis on infrastructure, agriculture, health, education, water supply, growth, and employment generation. At the resumption of plenary this week, the Senate leader, Senator Elendu-Ukeje, moved a motion for the consideration of the request, and it was subsequently seconded.
Mr. President, with your permission, I wish to move that the request be referred to the relevant committee for further legislative action. I so move.
Senate President Bukola Saraki then puts the motion to a vote.
Those in favor say aye. Those against say nay. Let me put the question again. Those in favor say aye. Those against say nay. Nays have it.
With that ruling, the motion was defeated. Speaking afterwards, the majority leader explains why the lawmakers voted against considering the president's request.
The presentation from Mr. President was not complete. There wasn't an attachment that is required for consideration. So we felt that taking it to the committee level without members, citing the details of the borrowing plans. The details of the borrowing plan is absent. That is one of the major reasons.
The Senate leader has promised to meet with the relevant members of the executive to discuss the details and do a proper presentation to the Senate at a later date. It's an outcome many did not anticipate.
Those in favor say aye. Those against say nay. Nays have it.
Senators rejecting the request by President Muhammadu Buhari to borrow the sum of $29.9 billion to execute key infrastructural projects across the country. Lawmakers in the House of Representatives are yet to consider the president's request, but clearly some of the lawmakers have concerns about the loan.
Look, I do not support the action of borrowing because this money is within some cabals and the multinational company. That is why I'm supporting Mr. President's effort, the war against corruption. Our money is in few hands, in the cabal's hand.
Our concern is that if we borrow this money and inject it into the Nigerian economy, what effect is it going to have on the size of our economy? What effect is it going to have on the GDP? We understand that Nigeria must create 20 million jobs in the next year, for instance. If we were to borrow this monies, what is the expected outcome? How many jobs are we expected? And, you know, they say they're putting it after infrastructure. But, you know, infrastructure must be tied into productivity. The TINAPA project, for instance, was a huge infrastructural project. But what effect has the TINAPA project had on the economy of Nigeria?
Some lawmakers say, despite the good intentions of the president, they have reservations about his team.
Like I tell you, the problem we are having, totality of Nigerians across party line believe in the integrity and good intention of the president. But truly speaking, as a member of the APC, truly speaking, I cannot vouch for all the people that surround Mr. President. I cannot vouch.
So will the president's request suffer the same fate in the House of Representatives as it did in the Senate?
Not suffer the same fate of the Senate, but we will proceed to ask for details. We will ask that we require definite positions and intended allocations.
If between now and tomorrow, whenever it comes to the floor of the House, we're furnished with this information, we may look a bit more kindly at it. But for as long as the information available is what the information is, then we may ask the same questions that the senators asked. And if that equates to it suffering the same fate, then, you know, it would be in the interest of Nigerians and we would have acted in the most patriotic way.
It has become almost a given for the Executive and the National Assembly to clash when it's time for the presentation and consideration of a new national budget. We witnessed this in previous administrations, and this trend continues even with the arrival of a new administration. Nigerians may be in for another round of clashes between the Executive and the National Assembly, as the Senate is accusing the Executive of submitting an incomplete medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal policy paper to the Senate.
If you look at this document that they call MTEF, it's empty. Going through and knowing that it's empty, on October 16th or 19th, this is my letter. I wrote to the Minister of Budget and National Planning, and I stated, to enable the Senate objectively review the MTEF from a holistic fiscal perspective, we deem it necessary to invite you to a meeting to brief the leadership of the Senate on Tuesday 1st. And the minister failed to turn up.
However, the Minister of Budget and National Planning, Senator Udo Udoma, has expressed surprise at the accusation by the Senate leader to the effect that he snubbed the Senate and refused to turn up for a scheduled meeting on November 1st, 2016. In a press statement, it said that while acknowledging receipt of a letter from Senator Ndume inviting him for a meeting with the Senate leadership, the minister said the meeting was eventually moved by agreement and wondered why Senator Ndume would go on the floor of the upper chamber to say he failed to turn up when he was aware that the meeting was rescheduled. More pointers to a strained relationship between the Executive and the Senate was shown as the Senate spokesman is asking public officials not to make careless statements capable of setting the public against the National Assembly. In July this year, Senate President Bukola Saraki set up 2 committees to reform the country's national budgeting process. But how much can the recommendations of these committees work when the National Assembly and the Executive cannot set aside their differences and work together to put together and implement a national budget?